Okay, I think probably it's about time to start, and I wanted to start, first of all, by welcoming you here to the Essex Business School and to the University of Essex. And probably I should introduce myself. I am Vania Sena. I am an academic at the Essex Business School here, whose building is hosting us. And I'm also the director of the ESRC Business and Local Government Data Research Center, that is one of the centers organizing this series on big data and talk big data series. Okay, so first, before I start, I should go through some housekeeping notices. I've been told that these are very important, and I can't leave them really at the end of my introduction. So, first of all, note that the discussion is filmed, so please be kind with your questions at the end, after the panel is presented. And
this isn't American politics.
Exactly. So, if you don't want to be filmed during the Q&A session, you should sit on the left side of the auditorium, which is my right-hand side, I've been told. Now, there are no planned alarm tests. This is actually quite important. So if there is a fire alarm, it simply means that we have to leave the auditorium because there is a real risk. In case of any emergencies, we have a fire exit located at each side of the auditorium. We need a bathroom. They are outside, of course, and they are you have to go through the foyer of the school and turn left. And if you need any assistance, the staff from the 3 centers is available for any questions that you may have. Staff is here on the front row, and there is Neil is there, and we have also other staff on the other side. And before we do enter into the interesting topic, I think what we want really to do is a bit of an exercise into understanding how much is known or understood here in this audience about big data. So you should have a clicker. Yes, everybody's got a clicker? Yeah, okay. So to use the clicker, if you're not familiar with this technology, what you have simply to do is click one of the answer buttons, and the chosen answer will initiate a green light on the clicker, and this means that the answer has been registered. So I got a couple of questions, not for the panel, that's for the audience. So first, let me know which of the following applies to you. Are you a student? If so, press A. Are you staff of the University of Essex? Press B. Are you working for the private sector? Press C. Are you working in the public sector? Press D. And press E if you are any other category. The system is recording the answers Okay, next question. Now, let us know how much you know about big data. And if you know a lot, press A. If you know a little, press B. And if you know anything at all, nothing at all, press C. Okay, next question. Answer how much you feel you use big data in a business context. Okay, think of your own business, your student business, or your business as staff, or any operational activity that you conduct. So, if you use big data a lot, press A. If you use big data little, press B, and if you don't use big data at all, press C. Okay, thank you very much for this little exercise. It helps us a lot to understand what type of audience we have, and it also helps us to calibrate future talks. Okay, now, in case you have answered no, I don't know anything about big data in the first question, I just wanted to give a brief introduction to big data, nothing technical. But this is a question that I have been asked so many times. So what is exactly big data? Starting from my husband and my daughter when I started working on this specific project. And the answer I give very simply is any type of data. Can be structured, can be unstructured, can be text, can be numbers, that in some sense we feel cannot be stored and analyzed using the standard techniques that come from social science. Okay? So if you think of the standard way in which we social scientists, I include myself because I am a social scientist, I work in a business school, the standard way we operate is effectively to arrange data in a simple, flat file that then gets read by an econometric package that produces then the analysis for us. When we get into the world of big data, this simple way of storing and analyzing data doesn't apply any longer because the data can be of different nature, can be complex, we can have text, we can have numbers. The econometric package is not of any help any longer because it is providing very partial analysis, very partial results to problems that have got many, many, many dimensions. Okay, so in some sense, understanding what big data can do for social scientists is something that is very important. I think we are now in a position where simply going into the ONS website and downloading data and then do analysis won't be an option any longer in a couple of years. We will have to be familiar with APIs, with the relational data sets. We need to understand what are alternative ways of storing this data. And this is exactly why we are working all together to bring this data revolution into our research community. Now, today's talk is about big data in business, and in particular is about, are they a help to businesses or are they a hindrance? Now, this is a bit of a provocative title, to be totally honest, because we do think that there are many benefits that come to businesses from the exploitation of their large data holdings. But we also acknowledge that they may create additional problems with storage, problems with analysis, problems with dealing with privacy, all sorts of additional issues that we probably may think business should be equipped in dealing with, but in reality they are not. And there is a large group of businesses that are not in a position to exploit the big data revolution because they don't have staff, because their staff have not been trained to the most advanced techniques, because of financial costs that are related to all these upgrades of software, storage devices, and so on. And that's what our panel has kindly agreed to discuss, to have a bit an understanding of what is that big data can do to businesses, in particular small and medium-sized enterprises, and in particular, what is it that keeping businesses away from benefiting from this big data revolution. Okay, and I wanted to stop here, but I want just to give 2 lines of promotion, marketing, if you let me. And I want just to remind you that the series is hosted by 3 big data projects that are here at universities and are funded by the Economic and Social Research Councils. So these are the Administrative Data Research Network here on my back, and the Business and Local Government Data Research Center, right there at the end. And then the Human Rights Big Data and Technology project that is led by Maurice there in the corner together with Lorna from the Law Faculty. Now, this is just 3 projects. These are the 3 projects that are funding that are supporting this series. In reality, we do have other initiatives around the universities that support the research around big data and research that uses big data. data. In particular, we have the Institute for Analytics and Data Science that is hosted on the Business Park, and we have the UK Data Archive and UK Data Service that provide the infrastructure to the research community for hosting and exploiting the big data. Okay, and so please do engage with the discussion this evening. We do have a hashtag #TalkBigData. And without further ado, I do introduce our chair, my colleague, Professor Neil Kellard. Neil, when did we meet? Was 5 years ago, 6 years ago, a long time ago?
Yes,
yes,
6
we
years
have been
ago,
colleagues
yes.
for years and years and years, and it's quite a pleasure. I'm quite delighted that Neil has accepted to chair this panel. So for those who don't know Neil is a professor of finance at the Essex Business School. He is the head of the finance group and a member of the senior management team. And he is leading very interesting research about price of commodities and in the agricultural sector, and he is definitely an expert to identify micro patterns in financial data. And Neil, I give the floor to you. Up to you. And
Vania, thank you very much indeed. Well, it's yeah. Well, it's a pleasure to be able to chair this session. Just to explain a little bit about it, I've got 4 areas that I want to explore with the panel, and we're going to look at what is big data and their experience of it, how it works and how well it works, what are the risks of big data to businesses, and also what the future holds, which I think is probably an interesting question for all of us. And then after that, and after the panel have had their say, I'll throw it open to you. So as we're going along, write down your questions, think of your questions, and then we'll have some time where you can ask the panel the things that are on your mind, give your comments, give your questions. So hopefully it'll be a very interesting session. We can have some dialogue and also speak to our esteemed panel here. And so therefore, before we get started, I'd like to introduce them and thank them for coming along. Beside me, I have Jasmine Birtles, who's a financial journalist, TV presenter, and the founder of Money Magpie website. Next to Jasmine is Ian Hutchinson, lead developer at Project by If. And on the end of the line, but certainly not the least, we have Helen Simpson, who's a professor of economics at the University of Bristol and an expert in industrial economics. So that's our panel. I think we should give them a round of applause. Okay, I'm going to start with the first question. And this is going to, hopefully, we'll start off with Ian here. Yeah. And a prosaic question, but a question to start. So
Sure.
what are the examples of big data collected by maybe your business or other businesses that you know that you've worked with? So give us an introduction.
Sure. So just to introduce what I do, my name is Ian, and I work at a design company in London called Projects by If, and we make things which change how people think about data, privacy and security. We do that through designing services with other organisations, public and private, and we also do research projects that kind of look at emerging needs that people have in different sectors. And I will have to make an admission, we don't directly work with big data, but we do create the means of which people interact with big data through businesses that offer services. And
that's right, Ian, you can still stay.
Very good, very good. But we talk a lot about something called consent models, and that means nothing to a lot of people. I can attest to that, but you've probably used them before. We talk about things like terms and conditions, which if you've signed up to a service, if you've installed a piece of software, you get presented with this rather large sort of 20-page long sort of roll of legalese, and within that sort of statement of legalese, you learn, or you're supposed to learn, about the way that you engage with these services and how they use your information, how they use your data. But let's be honest, no one reads these. You know, we go in, we press accept, and we just get on with it. And the problem there is that we don't really understand how our personal information, how our data is engaged with these services. And, you know, these days, more and more through things like, you know, the emergence of more digital services, through the emergences of Internet of Things devices, which measure, you know, very intimate things about our environment and our bodies, we don't really understand what's happening with our data. So what we do is we design some of these better models which kind of create a two-way conversation between consumers, people that create data, and the businesses which use it for their business purposes. And we've created a catalogue of these different sort of design patterns which allow users to have more sort of stronger consent. And I'll probably talk about some of these in the rest of this panel, but we sort of focus on creating better trust between the people that use services and businesses themselves. And that has a great advantage because you're more likely to engage with a business if you trust it more.
Absolutely. Thank you. Really interesting introduction. Helen, sort of the same question to you in terms of your experience of big data within your work.
Okay. So I'm obviously an academic. I used to work with what we might call large-scale administrative data sets, so things like data collected by the Office for National Statistics on the population of businesses in the UK. That really isn't big data anymore. It was when I first started operating with a couple of million observations. But what I think is more useful for me to highlight is some of the more sort of cutting-edge research which economists are now doing with what we really might mean by big data. So there are people now working with private sector organisations, so organisations like eBay, to try and use the data that they hold to better understand things like consumer behaviour. So there are people working, with data which contains every single click that you make when you go on a website, understanding how you browse, understanding what you ultimately purchase, and what determines what you ultimately purchase. So is it price, is it the seller's reputation, and understanding issues such as how consumers search for goods and how much price matters relative to reputation. Also, there's people using data from online charitable giving websites to do some very interesting research to understand what motivates people's donation patterns. Is it seeing your friend asking for a donation? Even some research sort of looking at whether men indeed give very high levels of donations when the person asking for a donation is a relatively attractive female versus a relatively unattractive female or indeed a man. And there's also sort of people looking at, connecting online giving databases to Facebook and looking at how many Facebook friends you have, and does that influence the amount of donation that you get. It's people wanting to work with online recruitment agencies to understand things like how people search for jobs. And I think this type of exercise can be useful, sort of combining economic theory with these big data sets. Some of these data sets, I think, can also, in a way, compete with some of the things that government agencies do. So people who have data on online recruitment, for example, they have real-time information about the current state of the labour market, which could be potentially exploited to provide, data telling you about employment conditions, perhaps much faster than institutes such as the Office for National Statistics can produce them. So I think there's a whole range of areas where economists are working with kind of real-time big data to understand lots of nuances of consumer behaviour.
Excellent, thank you very much. And we're definitely going to go and come back and look at the sort of this behavioural map that now can be made of us in terms of online behaviour and in terms of nowcasting and things like that. We'll talk about that later. But before we do, Jasmine, your experience of big data and the things you'd like to tell the audience as an introduction.
Well, as a personal finance journalist, I'm interested in big data from the point of view, really, more of the consumer, in a sense, than businesses. I'm interested to know if it does already, and if it will create a better value for the customer, something that's more personalised, more targeted, something that fits their needs better, or does it actually create an inequality of income between businesses and the consumer, particularly when it comes to financial companies, mortgage companies, banks, lending companies, etc. You can see that on the one hand, there's a lot of benefit potentially to the consumer for, I would say, sort of fairly uncomplicated things like car insurance, for example. The more data there is about the safety of your driving as opposed to your age or which postcode you happen to live in, the more likely you are to get a fairer level of insurance. But on the other hand, could it actually block some people from access to certain financial products, Or B, could it mean that, as Vania pointed out, the big companies with lots of staff, you know, the Avivas, the Microsofts, the Apples, you know, they're all going into finance as well, that they have all the knowledge and they target their products at us, the consumers, and all the little ones get no... nothing, no part of the pot. So it could potentially mean that yet again our actual choice is limited to a few big boys who've eaten up all the fish in the sea, all the little fish. It's the big fish that get all of the little fish. So that's what I'm interested in, and I'm seeing both sides at the moment. Jury's out as far as I'm concerned.
That's a great point to go on to our next area. So I really want to try and explore these positive benefits of big data to business and also perhaps some of the negative side of the risk. So we're going to now focus on these positive sides, what these benefits may be of big data and where the panel have seen them. So maybe, Helen, in terms of the positive sides of big data that you've seen within your work and your experience, maybe you could outline a few examples.
So not so much my own work, but work that I know of. So I think one of the big things that economists are quite keen to do is these days sort of work with companies and conduct what we think of as experiments to try and improve business performance. So there are people out there working, for example, with someone like eBay. And so when you go on eBay, sometimes you'll find the same seller trying to sell you one thing under sort of auction conditions and the exact same thing by saying you either buy it now at this price, you can buy it right away at this price. And so businesses like eBay will want to understand, you know, which is, from a purely profit maximizing point of view, which one of these selling mechanisms elicits the highest profit. So there will be people working sort of, you know, experiments where sometimes you'll go on a website and you will see, you know, a number of choices and see which one people pick. Sometimes the choices will be restricted to try and actually use experimental conditions to try and actually learn something more about consumer demand. That I can see can benefit the business. You know, ultimately, whether it could be at the expense of the consumer is a separate issue. If eBay is, you know, the only person doing this. Another way I think it can be beneficial is that on the other side, there are economists who are interested in sort of improving business performance. So businesses have a lot of data on what their employees actually do. There was a very nice paper recently which used data on supermarket cashiers in the States. They had 2 years of data on people sitting, you know, at the checkout, scanning stuff, and they were just trying to look at what influences these people's productivity. And they found something quite simple, which was when you were on a shift with another set of people who had, on average, higher productivity than you actually upped your game a bit. And you improved your productivity when you were working with people who were faster at scanning. So this type of data can be useful. There's other people running experiments with things like performance-related pay versus other types of incentives for employees, where they're actually using the company's own data, but at the same time introducing kind of experimental conditions where some workers are exposed to performance-related pay, others are not, to try and learn something about ways which firm performance can be improved, just using their own internal information.
Thank you very much. Ian, maybe the same question to you in terms of these positive areas of big data that we can think about.
So let me give you guys a bit of context. So I come from a critical design background, and that can be very, very negative in terms of how you sort of approach technology. And if anybody's, if anybody's a TV buff, you'll understand what I mean if you've ever watched Charlie Brooker's Black Mirror, for example. But I believe that, technology is a great enabler of doing, really interesting things for all sorts of different parts of society, whether it's public policy, whether it's, business, for example. So I really want to hit home that with mediation, technology can really, really be good for the economy, for the way people's lives work. But there needs to be a balance. And I'm talking about business at this point here. And I think the benefits honestly depend on what the business is. There's all sorts of buzzwords which exist, and one of them is blockchain, which is pushed around quite a bit. You know, people just say, let's throw a blockchain at the problem, that'll sort everything out. And it's the same with big data, right? It's almost like it's become a marketing term. But once you sort of pull back and once you sort of look at the essence of what, you know, most people mean by big data, they talk about having very large data sets, about, you know, very high resolution behaviours, whether it's consumers, whether it's systems, whether it's any other thing, and running algorithms through that to really uncover the hidden sort of patterns and the hidden insights which you can't really get when you look at small-scale data sets or when you try to manually look at that data. So it depends on the business, and I kind of like to separate it out between sort of the internal efficiencies and the kind of benefit to the consumer. So when we're talking about internal efficiencies, I know there's a recent article published about Google DeepMind, which is an organisation which specialises in machine intelligence, and they looked at the data from from buildings called data centres. And data centres are massive buildings. They're usually out in the desert in California or something, and they run the infrastructure that we rely on to actually use the internet. And you know, they're rooms filled with servers, and they generate a lot of heat. They use a lot of energy, but by using the data sets which, you know, sort of describe the environment in those buildings and running them through machine learning algorithms, they actually managed to reduce the bill for the energy consumption by about 40%, and that's a very tangible sort of benefit. But on the other hand, when you look at it from, you know, the consumer perspective, and I like to use retail for this example because, you know, everybody buys things from shops. We all go to Tesco's, Sainsbury's or whatever, and, you know, there's massive data sets about what we buy, and I like to talk about sort of your frequent shopper cards, your club cards, your Nectar points, etc. And, you know, there's a lot of data there about what you buy, and it can be really used to benefit consumers because, you know, if they can look at your patterns and say, oh, you're having a child, for example, then they can tailor the offers they give to you, for example. But as I know, and I mentioned that example very specifically, there are massive risks to that, which I think we'll get into the next section about.
Yeah, we certainly will. Can I just, you, at the beginning, you were talking about benefits to business being related to sort of mediation, a balance of these things. Yes. Can you just sort of expand on that just briefly, what you meant by that?
Yeah, so when I talk about mediation, it kind of goes back to the how I sort of introduced the work that we do at IF, about sort of creating the design patterns in the way that we interface with surfaces online, for example, how we interface with, you know, systems, internal systems. And it's about allowing people, so you and I, you know, that's a very sort of, that's a phrase we use quite a lot. We prefer not to use like the word user, for example, because it's very dehumanizing.
It's not very friendly.
It's very dehumanizing as well. And so we talk about how we can sort of design things for people and how we can give them their voice back, essentially, in the kind of decisions which are made in the background about how data is used. So whether that's, you know, kind of looking at the alternatives, the terms and conditions, the things that can really give people better consent. And one of the examples of this is this thing called data licenses, which we experimented with at an exhibition at Somerset House last winter. And instead of saying, do you accept the terms and conditions, we say, okay, we have your data. Do you want it to be used, or do you want it not to be used? Or do you want it to be public, or do you want it to be private? Or do you want it to be somewhere in between where you can choose the specific uses of that data? And about 15,000 people use this sort of installation, and we found just over 50% of people were really keen to share their data in whatever context, but if they have the choice of exactly how to do that. And it's in a very sort of specific context of location data. So, you know, if you use like a travel card, your home data, if you use a Nest or a Fitbit for your health data. So we gave people the choice to sort of decide on which information they want to set the terms of use for. And then we asked, okay, do you want to share it with commercial entities or just non-profits? Do you want to share it with all government, local government or no government? And an interesting thing in research as well is if you have a group of organisations working towards a similar goal, for example, in medical research, you could then say it's okay for you to share this data with people that are working on similar goals with you. And that really helps sort of break down the way that you sort of move your data around in terms of how it's used in services. And people, I think, really responded well to that. So that's what we're trying to do more of at Projects by IF, create tools and services which incorporate thinking like that so people have better consent, have better say of how their information is used.
Yes, I think in terms of trying to overcome this wedge between a company and, as you say, people, something like that, a kind of dialogue that people can have, it sounds very, very interesting. If we can then come on to consumers a bit, Jasmine, in terms of where you think maybe consumers have been impaired, where they've been benefited by big data as you know it. What would you say in particular?
Yeah, I think in a sense it's sort of, as I've been mentioning earlier, it is really the increase of knowledge and sort of more granular information about people's behaviours, what they're really like, whether they really can afford a particular mortgage, even though it might look from their tax returns that they can't. You can tell from their actual behaviours, from their spending patterns, that they probably could. So this sort of thing would help. Certainly, some people, on the other hand, it could stop other people getting it. But then, maybe that's right, because they shouldn't be getting those particular loans, those particular mortgages. I think what it could do, if businesses were able to think in a different way, is it could enable them to find better deals here and there. But this is part of the problem with business and consumer. The more a business knows about a consumer, if it were a charity, it might say, for example, gas and electricity company, it might see a lot of information about a particular area and think, well, actually, the best thing for you to do is to go to our competitor over there, because they're really much better for you. Of course, they're not going to do that. So what they're going to instead do, maybe, is come up with a slightly different package that will be more attractive to those consumers, not necessarily better for them, but certainly attractive. Finally, though, importantly, I am hoping that big data will mean that my personal preference for more pink coats rather than just black and grey coats in the shops around about this time will come up, and they'll produce occasional pink winter coats rather than black winter coats. This is the important stuff, that consumers need to have. So I think that it's the increased personalisation which should improve the choice of products for the consumer if it's done properly.
Okay, I've got, in terms of the sort of important areas that we've covered at the moment, I've written down trust as a particular issue, and pink coats as well. So I promise you, and I know this is a burning issue for many of you discussed it with me before, and we're going to come back to pink coats. Thank you very much, Jasmine. We've talked about what big data is a little bit, obviously within a small remit of time, and we've talked about some of the benefits. But I think, of course, a lot of the things are focused often on the risks of those things. So maybe, Jasmine, if I come back to you first. In terms of risk to consumers, where do you think the big risks are?
Well, I do think that it's, as I said, an inequality of knowledge, an inequality of income. You'll notice we are talking about big data in business, and frankly, it is business, governments, large organisations that have access to big data. Me personally, and anybody here on the panel, Helen, I'm sure, has much more access, and you probably do, to actual big data than I do, for example. So it's an unequal partnership, really. Business has all the knowledge, and although you can say, well, business is serving the consumer, and therefore big data enables them to serve the consumer better, knowledge is power, certainly when it comes to money. And there's a consumer going, oh, thank you very much, Mr. Businessman, for sending me that marvellous thing, not realising that has actually obscured their knowledge of various other products that actually would be cheaper and possibly better. So to me, it's really the unequal partnership that is, to the consumer, the biggest risk.
And this asymmetry of information that you're talking about, are there ways of overcoming it? We talked a little bit about how one might overcome a trust deficit by having a dialogue within a company, but any other ways that we can overcome this? Well,
honestly, I think it's only at not just a national government, but international government level. I think that's the only way that it can be done. The EU, as you know, has started and will keep on, I'm sure, helping people have more privacy, and that's the sort of organisation that will be putting more and more strictures, I'm sure, on businesses and on information gathering organisations. But left to its own devices, of course, why would businesses, including the data gathering companies, of which there are more and more, particularly in London, I've noticed, why would they simply offer them for free to the consumer? They might offer them at a price, but that price is going to be, I'm sure, way bigger than individuals could possibly afford. So I think it would have to be at a government level insisting on A, more privacy, and that's something where you would come in, of course, and B, more openness so that we all have access to this data, and certainly about the data that's being held about ourselves. Boy, that'd be interesting.
Yeah, I think it would be. Absolutely. Helen, in terms of the risks that you've seen in your work, maybe bringing it back to business a little bit, what can you tell us about that?
I mean, typically, academics in my field are quite reliant on being able to access,
that's right.
very big data sets, be it on companies or individuals or even information from an individual company. But we typically operate under pretty strict rules to ensure, anonymity. Any results that we publish from our research go through pretty strict procedures in terms of, never revealing anything about an individual business or indeed an individual person. I think from an academic perspective of, trying to use these data to inform public policy, for example, what's most important is really continued access to it. And so Essex is obviously, sort of the home of this in terms of the data that economists use. We're always coming to Essex to use the secure data services here. So I think, if we're going to start using data more from private sector businesses, this is a kind of new area for some academics, negotiating with private sector businesses in terms of ensuring anonymity of private sector data as opposed to governmental data. And indeed for private sector businesses, if they're thinking of sharing their data with academics, they also then presumably have to think about how they, let the consumers who are providing this data know that they're doing that. And academics also like to link data sets together. So you could give me one data set which is perfectly anonymized, but in principle I could then link it to another one. So I think thinking through these types of things from an academic perspective to ensure that the data is still available to us, but also ensuring that people are willing to provide it. I think these recent issues about, should everyone's health records be made available is kind of the key thing, from a point of view of learning about, improving medical treatment, great. But everyone sort of sits there thinking, do I really want my entire medical history to be made available to a researcher?
Because as we know, data never, ever gets leaked.
Oh, God, yes.
Never, ever, ever gets leaked.
It's always right.
It's always right. Helen, thank you very, very much. Ian, the risks in risks in the system. You're hinting at it earlier on.
Yeah, so...
full vent to it.
Thank you. I love having this opportunity to vent about the risks.
Yeah, please do.
So there's, on the top, and we kind of alluded to this just now, is, the whole sort of information security risk. So, there have been massive leaks of data in the past. The most recent one, the biggest one in the history of the internet, was something like 500 million records from Yahoo. People in the UK might remember the TalkTalk leak last year as well. But I kind of want to talk about the idea of profiling, and this is something that you alluded to, Jasmine, and this idea of what do companies know about you. And I spoke about the sort of benefits of big data in something like retail, and a story that came to mind when I was thinking about this panel is it happened in the US, and it was the supermarket Target, I think it is, a supermarket called Target, and a young woman who was shopping at Target was buying things which sort of suggested that she was pregnant and she was going to have a child, and she used her sort of membership card to buy these items so she'd get the savings from it, and obviously all that purchase information is saved on their systems, and they use that data to generate offers to her, and they send coupons to her door. And what happened was, she didn't want her father to know that she was pregnant, and her father, got these coupons which had been generated on the back of this open data. So, they were very, and that caused a lot of sort of family problems for them, and it was a big story a couple of years ago. And this idea of profiling is something which is actually, being targeted by something called the GDPR. It's the General Data Protection Regulation, and it's a bit of EU legislation which is coming out in 2017. I'm going to avoid the Brexit talk. I don't want to do any of that.
We're going to come to Brexit in a little bit.
But this, the GDPR is one of the biggest changes to data protection legislation, which has happened, for a very long time, and it has very sort of very large implications for businesses, because if you fall short of these obligations, one of which I'll get into in a second, there are very real punishments for businesses. We're talking 3% of global profit as a fine in that respect. And one of the interesting aspects of GDPR is this idea about the right to restrict processing and the right to question how algorithms sort of make decisions about you. And as we've been speaking, there's the idea of insurance and sort of knowing how insurance quotes are given to you, and there's all these data sets about how you drive. I know Aviva have started to produce an app which gives you discount on your insurance based on your sort of ability to brake very smoothly and various other things. But I mean, I don't know what exactly is behind that app, and we're talking about things to do with literacy and this sort of inequality, and as well as, knowledge, being power, it's also the ability to sort of describe these things and talk of these things as well. We use the word data as this idea of, numbers and symbols and other sorts of stuff, basically, and it's such an abstract concept that people aren't able to interrogate these things because we just don't know how to talk about them. And, there's a massive inequality between customers and business, but there's also a massive inequality between, experts and everyone else. It's like, why should a certain part of society be afforded more rights just because they know more about this thing? So there's a very sort of big risk about, the kind of imbalance of power. I agree on that point quite a lot.
And coming back, thank you very much. Just coming back to expertise, is one of the risks to business per se that it doesn't necessarily have the expertise to use these things, to use them appropriately, either for profit maximisation or responsibly for consumers? Is that a problem? Is education a problem in general, do you think, of business?
Absolutely, and I think from the business perspective, so it's very easy to talk about the massive sort of IT consultancies which work with other large organisations to implement these kind of big data projects, but because we're seeing the democratisation of these technologies through cloud services, for example, like as a small business, as a bakery somewhere in the countryside, as a small salon in central London, you can access these big data services and you can create other digital services to better serve your customers. But because of the obvious difference in resources between these two different groups, the big companies, albeit sometimes they sort of fall short on this, are able to, secure these systems and to a certain extent guarantee a certain level of security. But because these smaller companies who have, suddenly access to this massive sort of hosepipe of, being able to manipulate data and get insights from data, they will very likely lack the kind of same expertise in order to secure this information. But, there are techniques available to sort of mitigate these risks. One of them, obviously have good information security. It's ridiculous how many organisations, especially, considering how long the internet has been around, don't sort of encrypt their passwords, for example. It's a ridiculous thing. And also I've seen so many websites and so many online services ask for information which is completely irrelevant to the service they're providing me. It's a technique called data minimisation, where you only ask what's needed to make that service work. And you see all the time, you see, random services that don't do very much ask for like your gender and your date of birth, and they don't really need to know that. So they're just opening the floodgates basically for something bad to happen, where, trust is reduced and also, data is leaked.
Thank you very much. We're going to have one more section looking at the future of big data and its techniques and application. Then I'm going to be throwing it open to you. So be thinking of your questions, maybe writing them down, and we'll get to that in a second. So, moving to the future, we're thinking about the Internet of Things. We're thinking about issues over privacy as more and more data is collected. Helen, what's going to happen in the future? Tell me. How do I need to prepare myself?
Therefore, I'm the worst. No, I mean, I can only really talk in terms of, where I see academic research going. And
sure.
I think one exciting sort of project which people are doing in America is this kind of more real-time production of what we might traditionally have thought of as official statistics. So using big websites, you can look at price changes and you might be able to produce something like a consumer price index on literally a daily basis, as opposed to waiting for some figures to come out from the government, which are then updated a month later and, oh, they're slightly adjusted because they were a bit wrong. You know, the government's getting some of these, you know, they're using survey data to find out information on prices, whereas actually these companies know this much better. We already see this from things like house price indices. You've got the Nationwide and the Halifax telling you what house price changes are, possibly well in advance of what someone like the Land Registry is telling you. And in some countries, this project, it actually turns out that some of the government statistics on what's happening to something like inflation, you know, could be really quite wrong. And actually, if you use data from actual people's purchases in real time, you know, in a lot of countries we have complete trust in government statistics, but that's not always the case around the world. So I think there's some quite exciting things to be done in terms of producing more real-time indicators, particularly, you know, I'm going to mention Brexit, but I'm not going to talk about it. You know, after Brexit, you want to know things like, are non-UK EU nationals still applying for jobs here at the same rate as they used to do so? Or, you know, what's happening to the labour market? And people have produced statistics from online recruitment agencies and can very quickly say, how are employers responding to Brexit, and how are potential employees responding to Brexit in terms of job applications or how they write their job adverts? And so this kind of real-time use of big data to me seems quite exciting.
I think it's very exciting. I do. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Jasmine, the future. Tell me about the future.
Yeah, I wonder if the future has certainly more accurate predictions through big data, and then a realisation of its limitations. Because although big data, I think, can go pretty granular, I don't think there will, personally, I don't think there will ever be a time when big data will get it right all the time. I think it'll get it very wrong, because it's the nature of nature. It's the nature of human beings. We are in many ways creatures of habit, certainly. We have a lot of boring similarities. We think our own thoughts, but a lot of the time we don't. We just think, you know, what's going on in the world generally. But at the same time, we throw in spanners in the works. It happens so often in so much. I mean, this building, I'm sure, was built with all sorts of data, and then, you know, nature comes in and goes, actually, no, I'm going to do this. So I think we will see its limitations. What I also am concerned about, actually, with big data is that it will create its own reality. Because if you assume that you are predicting what somebody is going to think and want, it might actually not be. But if you, as you say, if you send somebody vouchers for certain things which actually they wouldn't have thought of getting, they might get the vouchers and go, oh, actually, yes, I do. Or, you know, if you tell people that they are a something, if you keep saying to somebody, yeah, you're old, you know, you're really, oh, boy, you're old. And you're 45. But actually, you know, oh, you're old. You go, actually, do you know, so I think that this is what I keep going to the risks, you know, the downsides. But I do think that if big data does take over, it will tell us what we want, so, rather than us actually thinking, yeah, do you know, I really want to do this, and it going, as it happens, we've just thought of this for you, here it is. So that's one of my concerns.
I mean, I suppose as we're all more linked, you can get a collective mindset, can't you? As we're less separate, we come together, we think as one. We've seen that in pockets like the financial industry, where people who are educated together think very similar, do the same things, can result in good and sometimes bad actions. So that is a very real risk. Thank you very much. Ian, Internet of Things, the future.
Yeah.
Where's it all going? It's exciting, isn't it?
It's exciting, but also very, very terrifying in certain respects, as long as we think about how we design this for people. So you mentioned IoT. I think the future of big data is that it's going to get even bigger, because we have new devices, we have things that live in our homes, live in our wrists, live in, you know, equipment and tools which, you know, never used to have this kind of sort of connection to the internet where new data sets can be created. So there's definitely the potential and growth of big data sets. Something that I've sort of slightly alluded to earlier today is this idea of hacks and leaks, and there's only going to be an increase in this because, let's face it, there are new actors in the sort of area of cybercrime. We're talking about cyber warfare sometimes, state-sponsored hacking. These are things which are starting to become more and more common. I talked about how small businesses as well will also start to move into the area of big data, and I talked about some of the security implications of that. And especially in IoT, we have a lot of small startup companies creating devices, IoT devices, and they kind of lack the security which the bigger players have because they're trying to move really quickly and agilely. The technology is really easy to build, but it's also very difficult to secure this as well. And finally, I think this is the hope that I think as a public, as a society, we're going to have bigger and bigger expectations for privacy and security. Later this year, I think it's already come out in the US, there's the film about the Edward Snowden affair. And, just the fact that there's a film about something so niche like, hacking and cyber warfare and, the leaking of private data just kind of shows how much we've moved forward as a society in terms of how we kind of expect our privacy to be respected, our human rights to be, have this right to privacy and the kind of ethical framework around that. And, legislation is going to follow as well. Like I said, GDPR is coming, like it or not, in, 2017. And that really sort of, puts us in a good step towards, working towards a more sort of private and secure ecosystem. But I think there's a lot of work to be done, and one of the main problems in that is that businesses need to treat this as a design problem. It kind of originally came out as kind of like a legal problem, like you sort of stuck the terms and conditions on at the end, lawyers were happy and it's fine, but we really need to treat this as a design problem, and that's capturing things like being able to create that two-way conversation between consumers and businesses. And it's really thinking about, on the technical level as well, how do you design this in the best way that respects people's privacy and increases security as well.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the panel. We've covered a number of areas, haven't we, over the last 35, 40 minutes. We've talked about trust and ethics in big data. We've talked about improving business performance and sometimes benefits to consumers and risk to consumers. We've talked about nowcasting in various different aspects, that being able to follow things in real time. And we've talked about the need for expertise. But right now, we've heard from the panel. I'd like to hear from you. And so if you've got comments, that's fine. We've got thoughts, questions, please. We've got a roving mic, I think, somewhere. So you don't... here it comes. So any questions, any comments, feel free. Remember, we're being recorded, so be nice. Okay? But feel free to be forthright as well. Gentleman over there. Maybe if you could say... Maybe you could say your name and where you're from and your question.
Hello, my name is Wilfred Ariswitnam. I'm from a small business intelligence consultancy in Ipswich. The question I'm putting is: you talk about the skill set that's been, not been present. What are universities like the University of Essex doing, and what does the panel think about more commercial products? Because I believe IBM have a product called Watson. Is big data going to become something like using Excel in the future?
I suppose from the University of Essex perspective, I could answer that question.
Yeah,
it's not a plant, okay? It's not a plant, is it? To check that. So we have a number of degrees in big data, exploring the links between big data and various areas of computer science and finance and business per se. And certainly that's the way that we're trying to enhance people's expertise, both for the economy in this country and elsewhere. In terms of education, more generally in the private sector, anyone want to pick that up?
I can talk about, because this idea of education, I see it more as a sort of digital divide question between the people that are digital natives or they're up to date with technology and people who aren't. And I think one of the big problems in terms of tools, you talk about Excel, it's a very sort of people know how to use it to a certain extent, but a lot of the tools which are involved in kind of like having privacy, having security, are absolutely ridiculous to use. You kind of almost need a computer science degree in order to be able to use them. And, you know, we talk about the way that data is collected from our, you know, the websites we go to, the devices we use. Some organisations, they, you know, pick apart emails to kind of get insights from how we sort of express ourselves to other people. And a lot of this stuff is kind of, you know, nicely packaged up and it's really easy to use, but the stuff that helps you protect yourself, and I'm talking things like tools to encrypt your messages, tools to sort of obscure the websites you visit, for example, these are very difficult to use. They usually come out of the military as well, so there's a lot of military language used, which can really turn people off, and it's kind of talking about that divide in rights as well. I think it's a, you know, it's a massive ethical question, and one that we should address, and it's something that we do through the work of projects by IF, is there shouldn't be a divide between the people that are able to be afforded these rights and protect themselves more online and the people who can't. And it's about designing it better and designing it in a way which is accessible.
Actually, one thing that occurs to me from your business itself is that maybe in the next few years, and I really do, in the next 5 years, we will have data intelligence businesses in the same way as we have SEO businesses. I mean, I use an SEO agency. I don't have the cash in my business to have whole full-time employees doing SEO. Sadly, one day, hope I do. But I can use an agency, you know, here and there. So I'm guessing that there will be more agencies like yours that small businesses can go to and say, give me the data, I'll give you, you know, one project, just give me the data, and then they go off, I'm guessing.
Excellent. Thank you very much for your question. Oh, lady at the front here first. Oh, no, we're going to the band at the back, are we? Lady at the front here first, and then we'll come to the gentleman at the back. No problem. We've got lots of time. This building never shuts. Is that true?
Tessa Rogoski, and I work in IT at the university. I wanted to ask the panel how aware they are of the size of their digital footprints and whether they do anything about the size, potential size of their digital footprints.
Who wants that one first? I don't want to.
You would.
Yeah, I'll happily take it. So,
yeah.
Yes, I am aware of how big, you know, my digital footprint is, you know, in terms of the software and the devices I use. I'm also aware how big it is in terms of my interactions with what we, you know, tend to call public space. So, you know, CCTV capturing my face, my travel card movements and things like that. And that's the thing, right? I kind of alluded that before. Lots of people don't. And the problem is that, you know, we're afforded a lot of conveniences by, you know, things like Facebook, for example. You know, it makes it really easy to communicate with your friends. But, you know, the amount of data which Facebook collects about you is, you know, incredible. You can almost expect that when you click on something or when you click away from something as well, you can expect that information to be logged and to create a profile about you and your behaviour. And I think one of the striking things about that is, like, you know, there are ways of finding out how big your, you know, data footprint is, if they even, you know, sort of provide that. But they're hidden within sort of like 16 different layers. I got two good examples that you guys can do right now, or probably later on. It's rude to get your phone out in these kind of things, but there's one in iOS. So if you have an Apple iPhone, iPad, etc., where you go into your settings, you go into privacy, so that's a little bit further down. Then you go into system services, which is kind of like at the bottom. Then you go to location services, and then you can look at this map of your sort of recent locations, it's called, and it's a pretty sort of, you know, in-depth kind of black box almost of where you've been, and it has like the names of places, the times of places.
Oh dear.
Yes. So there's that, and then there's a part of Facebook which again is hidden away in a ridiculously long URL. So it's like facebook.com/ads/preferences/edit. Then you click on the tab, you scroll all the way to the bottom, and it gives you like a list of these insights which Facebook have created about you. Some of them are kind of explicit, so, you know, some people like to say where they're from, where they live now, so it can create the insight that you've moved away from home, for example. But there's one about me which I didn't explicitly tell Facebook, which is really interesting. It's the fact that I live in a housemate-based household. And there's no part of Facebook where I can say I live with housemates. And I'm assuming it's taken information of where I've used my phone, where I've sent messages from, that there's 3 weird guys who go to the same pub every Friday, in kind of an area around where I spend a lot of my time, my house, and it's kind of made that assumption already. So, yeah, there are massive sort of divides in how, how much people know about these things, and it's the way these things are designed, we can't know. They just sort of work, but...
Any other responses to that from the panel, or not? That doesn't have to be.
No, others say no. Is the answer no? I know I've got one. I have no idea how big it is, and it'd be interesting. I think probably scary, in all honesty, to see, and that's probably why I haven't looked. I know it's big, and I don't want to see it.
Tessa, do you want to come back on that at all in terms of what you think?
I just wondered, Ian seems to be the most aware. Have you done the 16-level menu to go and turn some of these things off, or do you feel the benefit of the service it makes it worth leaving that information out there? I
mean, I keep this location service thing on because I actually quite enjoy freaking people out about this sort of thing. So that's the only reason why I do it. The reason why Apple do it is because they can facilitate things like, for example, if it knows that you go to a certain place within working hours quite a lot during the work week, then it can assume that that place is where you work. And, Facebook have the thing about, advertising. That's the reason why they create this graph. But I leave it on, for that reason, to show people. And I think also, I personally believe I'm aware of the benefits and also the disadvantages, and we all make this trade-off, right? We all make this trade-off saying, I probably know this thing is hemorrhaging lots and lots of data about me, but I still want to be able to share pictures with my friends and talk to my mum on Facebook Messenger, for example. So yeah, awareness is a massive thing, but I kind of also think that a lot of people would still sort of utilise these services because of the the benefits that they give to them. It
would be more useful, though. I think we do need to know, consumers particularly, that we do need to know, and to know, as you say, that the 16 levels, I don't know those, and it would be really useful to send them out more, to broadcast it more to people so that they can make an informed choice. And as you say, if they go, well, actually, yeah, I do like having these vouchers when I'm in Lakeside, Thurrock, which I go to a lot, and I like this, so I will trade off some of my personal information. Or they might go, no, I want to go completely off-grid, actually. And I think it would be very useful for more people to understand that.
Yeah, transparency is key, so people can make that decision.
Thank you very much, Tessa. A question over from the gentleman over there, please. Just, there we go. Gentleman is standing
up. Hi, my name is Robert Camara, and a partial answer to the previous gentleman's question. I'm part of a KTP with Uni Essex, which is a knowledge transfer program, which is a partnership between Innovate UK, University of Essex, and a private company in Chelmsford called Objective Computing, and they pair up recent graduates with companies, and we're doing a data analytics exchange where we're trying to provide a new capability to a local company, and so part of that may be a way that you can investigate that problem, because Uni Essex is great at these KTP programs, and they're looking for new partnerships with companies all the time, and it might be a possible solution.
Yeah, so. That's great. Thank you. Now, I think there were some other questions. Were there over there? Am I right? Or is it just my vision these days?
There's a lady here.
Oh, lady down here?
Yeah.
Oh, you've missed your chance over there. Put your hand up. We can come back to you. Lady over here's grab your spot. Over there? Oh, no, over there as well. It's okay. All right. Okay.
Hello, my name is Sharon. I'm from China, and I am the visiting scholar here. My major is about the entrepreneurship and innovation, and I'm concerned about the SME, about the innovations. I wonder if that is the trend in the futures, the older SME and the startups, they will have their cooperation with some company. They are research about the big data. And because I am talk with some startups, they don't concern about the big data because they are facing with the can I survive in the future?
Just, where's my cash flow? That's right.
Yes. I want to ask if they will pay attention about the big data, about all the startups and their SMEs in the future. Maybe it is very important for them, and maybe it is the new ways for them to find their survivals about other things. Yeah.
Sure. No, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
So, small startup companies, how can they benefit from big data when they're so worried maybe about cash flow and just getting started? Any particular advice from the panel?
I can talk about startups because we've done a lot of work with startups, and a lot of the conversations we have is in terms of like utilising their customers' data is like we haven't figured out how to engage with them. We just do the default thing of like sticking terms and conditions on the thing and just being done with it. And I think that's one of the main sort of issues about sort of small businesses, SMEs, kind of collecting more data, is that this idea of how you engage with your customers has almost been reduced to like an issue of compliance and the thing that you kind of stick on the end just to keep the lawyers happy. And one of the bits of work that we've been doing at IF is kind of formalising these patterns which you can use to get consent from people. We call it the data permissions catalogue, and it's essentially a way that we don't take ownership of this whatsoever, right? We think this is an open conversation. We put everything online. People can contribute to it. People can add their own things. People can edit existing patterns, and by having that available freely online, it means that small businesses that have to work in really sort of fast, agile way, always thinking about cash flow, can sort of look at a reference of what's out there in terms of improving their engagement with customers, and really sort of taking that barrier to entry away from how they engage their customers, and that will have good benefits for how they use big data.
Is this what your research is particularly looking at? SMEs and big data in particular, or is this just an area of interest of yours at the moment?
Yeah, because I found maybe they don't care about a lot of the customers' informations. They just maybe just drop it. But I found there is something that is very good. Just I know a woman have a startups, and she collect all the information about the customer, just like the birthdays and habit, and when the birthdays send an email to them and have some discount in that. And I remember there is a word says that to have the old customers, and it will old customer will bring the more new customer to you. It is easy for you have a new customers. Yeah. So I think maybe find a way for them to concern about the big data and what is the benefit for them in the futures for the startups and SMEs.
I would have thought, actually, and this is probably something that universities can get involved in, that the whole analysis of big data, which is universities in particular are doing, and some big businesses, should spawn some startups, because that analysis will be finding out where the gaps are, actually. They'll probably find, there's a whole load of consumers here in Colchester that want this, and nobody's giving it to them. There's a business, you've already got the information. So, that I would have thought would be a good thing for big data and small businesses.
Thank you very much indeed. Other questions? Yes, look, this corner's going mad. This corner's caught. Here we go. We're not doing it deliberately, by the way, so yes. You have to run.
Keep going.
I don't know. Hands up, please. Yes. Oh, yes. Okay, so lady on the M first, and then we'll move down the row.
Hi, I'm Melanie Wright. I'm Director of the Administrative Data Service, which is located here at the University of Essex. And I had a question about these new intriguing models of interactive consent that you were talking about, Ian. I must admit, I'm a little bit skeptical. First of all, given that we don't take the time to read our terms and conditions ever, why are we going to take the time to interact with every single service or business or organization that we give data to about all of the variety of parameters that we might give or not give consent to? And secondly, even if we were willing to do that, will that really protect us? Your story of the girl who gave permission so she could have a loyalty card, knowing full well that she would get tailored ads in response, coupons in response. Generally, she was positive about that, I'm sure, but in the end, it ended up harming her. it didn't protect her. So aren't we just fetishizing consent as something that's going to save us when we should be thinking differently?
So on your first point about sort of these new consent models being hard to interact with, that's absolutely a concern. And one of the things that we do when we sort of research user interfaces and the like is, really sort of getting to grips with the audience that are using these services. There's not a one-size-kind-of-fits-all sort of solution to this. So we really need to understand the context which these sort of consent models are used in, I think. And then also looking at the different ways we can design these. So maybe, it's not like a screen which, has like loads of text. Maybe it uses symbology. There's a thing that WhatsApp have created, the messaging app, which kind of explains how their encryption service work. And it's not a sort of perfect kind of like reflection of what I mean, but the way it sort of breaks down these issues into very sort of short sentences and uses illustrations is really helpful to allow people to interact better with these things. So, yeah, there's not a one-size-all solution. It will definitely be, and it's a problem now. Like, it's really difficult to look at all the different ways that services sort of consent with. But there's some really interesting work being done, sort of open source work of how can you make these sort of consent models less kind of one-to-one. So, like, I let this service use my data, allow this service use my data, allow this service to use my data. There's really interesting sort of open source projects about how can you sort of create a sort of set of intentions, so sort of groups which you think you want your data to be shared with. And by creating this kind of central store of how you want to consent your data to be used, and allowing that to create a profile of how you want to share your data, then that creates like less of a sort of one-to-one kind of having to, laboriously
reduce the scale a bit.
Reduce the scale of it. On the idea of will it really protect us, that's a very valid point, and I'll be the first to say there's no such thing as 100% privacy, and there's no such thing as 100% security. But we can do things to mitigate risk, and there's the expectation that at some point something that you say online that you think is private may one day be in the public. That's an absolutely normal kind of assumption to make, because we need to be realistic. Like, the internet is such a massive, wide-ranging thing. Data is stored. Data is never really deleted because it's archived. It's copied everywhere. So there's a lot of kind of blur around security in the sense of how we traditionally think about, setting a piece of paper on fire, and that's that gone. So on the idea of will it really protect us? It won't completely, but it'll start to work towards something which is more likely to protect us than the kind of models that we sort of deal with now.
At the end of your question, you said, should we be thinking differently? Is that thinking differently enough for you, or did you have some other things in mind? Or was it a throwaway thing? That's okay if it was.
No, I don't have the answers. I don't have the answers, but I am intrigued by it, because I think I work with big data in a different domain. These are data that are collected by government bodies and agencies, not by businesses. And we are very clear that we are looking to use those data for research for good, for public benefit. So I think some of the things that, some of the solutions that might work in that domain are not going to be very interesting or useful to business. But I think we do need to be thinking about, in the domain that I work in, do people in fact have a moral obligation to share their data, actually? Because it's going to benefit everybody if they do. So that's kind of the realm I'm thinking of, is consent actually what we should be looking at, or should we be looking at inculcating a sense of civic duty around data sharing?
Can I add to that quickly?
Yes, you can.
Yes, so that's an interesting point, the idea of moral obligation. I think part of it is, designing the consent well, but another part is, educating people about the benefits of, openly sharing data where it makes sense. And, we talk about medical research, we talk about how, the city landscape can be improved. But, I imagine if you pulled a random people off the street, it would be very difficult for them to kind of think of the benefits of, sharing information with other organisations.
Fantastic, thank you. We've got time just for one or two more questions. So I think there was another question there, wasn't there? And then maybe, okay, we'll try and fit in maybe three. Probably no chance.
Seema, and I'm an aspiring data scientist, and just listening to this, I just changed the title, Big Data for Users. Is it really help or hindrance? And leading on from her, what she was just saying, I think, is there any really benefit to the users or people? In fact, you might get a 10% off for a voucher. Actually, that £1.25, is that a good enough trade-off for the data you are handing in to people? And really, again, she almost read my mind. I like, although being an aspiring data scientist, I shouldn't be saying this. Shouldn't it be only used for social security and things like charities and restricted from being used by businesses? I don't think as users you're really benefiting in the long run. That's just what I felt sitting here today. But I'm learning data analytics anyway. Thank you.
I have to say, it is certainly my view. I was talking to a friend from the Future Foundation a year or so ago, and they did lots on big data. They still are, actually. And he was saying, it's absolutely amazing. It's going to do incredible things for marketing. It's going to enable total personalisation. It's extraordinary. It's like Black Mamba. And, when I was listening to it, I was thinking, gosh, that's awful. Oh, that's really awful. Terrible. In so many ways. I know you've got another session later on talking about, another day talking about it from legal, moral point of view. But, as I was saying earlier, I do think that it can create its own reality, and particularly, actually, in the field of medicine. We are extremely suggestible creatures, and if they collate all sorts of medical data and say, oh, you're this age, you're going to get this, you're a male, you're at this age, you live in the right, you're going to get this. It's quite possible people go, oh yeah, and I've got it. It's there. I've got, it's incredibly dangerous, and I'm not even starting on the whole. The political side, you can see a time where Amazon finds that you've just emailed somebody saying that you didn't think Hitler had gone far enough. So have you thought of reading Donald Trump's best speeches? Here's the book. So if you're targeting, you're going to increase people's prejudices rather than you're possibly going to reverse a liberal education. It seems to me, but that's maybe me getting excitable.
Before we move on to why and other things, I know there are a couple more questions. People had their hands up, so we just try and get to those. One at the back there. Yes. Gentleman there, and maybe the gentleman there, and then maybe. I'd like to. We'll see how we do.
Good evening. My name is Magdalia. I'm in Essex Business School. I can see the conversation is going a bit. Criticism towards big data and...
Bring us back to a more positive light.
No, not actually my intention.
On to another question.
No, I'm using big data in various projects, and actually it is my lucky research area, so I am with big data, but it is actually what I can sense from the criticism of big data, and I would like to explore more about the inequality between businesses, because I'm looking for business to business and in supply chain, and we can see that business to business, each one of them could get access to big data, and how that will be linked with fair competition, because both of them got access to big data, and maybe they have the resources to have access to big data. So is it the legalization that it is behind with commercial laws, that they are not actually with the speed of how businesses are using big data, and the legalization is still behind? What is your thought about that? Thank you.
Financial perspective, is regulation behind in terms of things?
Yes, I think regulation's usually behind in terms of things. Certainly in this country, we have, as you know, the FCA, and it used to be the FSA, and the problem that it has is that it's kind of poacher and gamekeeper at the same time. They're trying to help the financial companies, but at the same time regulate them, and that is very difficult. They don't want to. Our financial arena is extremely important to this country, so they don't want to dampen it, but at the same time, consumers are being ripped off on a daily basis, certainly when it comes to investing and even sort of day-to-day stuff like insurance. Yeah, I do, and it's the same with fraud, and I'm sure this is something that you cover, Ian, a lot, that it's very, very hard for the police and authorities to keep up with the fraudsters, particularly online fraudsters, for whom this is a full-time job, coming up with more and more nasty ways to steal our money from us. And in the same way, the companies that are gathering our data and have been for quite some time and are getting really good at analysing them, they're way ahead, I think, of regulators who are still playing catch-up in terms of their knowledge as well as their actual ability to push stuff through government. I mean, we all know how slow governments are, generally, particularly big ones like the EU or World Bank, etc.
Now, I'm terribly sorry. I'm getting a look from the organisers, which tells me that I've already let it go on too long. So I'm sorry for those who have still got questions. I'm sure there are many questions and ideas out there. We are going to have drinks and nibbles afterwards, so please come and talk to the panel and share your ideas. But for now, I wonder if we could just put our hands together and thank the panel for their contribution. Vania is just going to come and close the session, and thank you for your questions and your comments. Very interesting. Thank you.
Okay, now it's okay. Okay, just want to thank Jasmine, Ian, and Helen for their thoughts and for sharing their experiences. Neil, many thanks for the superb chairing of the session. And I just wanted to add one thing. I mean, there's been a mention about training and what university does. In reality, we do a lot. And actually, two of these two centers have got a strong training program. So if there's anybody interested in basic training around uses of methodologies for exploitation of data, and particularly large data sets, I mean, we can help. And please do talk to Alex here or to Neil there in the corner, and to representative from the ADRN, Judith. I mean, and finally, I wanted to ask one last question. Do you still have the clicker? I hope so. And now, please answer this question. After this interesting discussion from the panel, how much do you understand about big data? Answer A, if you understand a lot. Answer B, if you understand a little. Answer C, if you understand nothing at all. Okay, thank you very much for being here. Just want to remind you that the next session of the Talk Big Data event will be on Thursday, 10th of November, and the topic is changing lives through big data research. Finally, as Neil said, there is a reception out there, and please do stay, and please talk to our panelists who will be here during the reception, and I'm sure they will be happy to answer more questions. Thank you.